Thank you very much. Okay, so now recording has begun, and I certainly I would have forgotten to do that until about 20 minutes into the thing, and then I would have kicked myself. So thank you very much. Okay, so this will be recorded, and as usual, it should be available sometime early next week, or I don't know, maybe even at the end of the day today. Okay, so again, the topic here is filtering data in a data worksheet, and of course, feel free to ask questions, like I just said. Now, there are many different ways to filter data throughout our products. For those of you who are dashboard users, and most of the webinars that we've done so far this year, last year, the year before, have all been related to dashboards in one way or another. And so you know that in dashboards, there are many ways to filter data. There are selection components, selection lists, selection trees, range sliders. You can actually add filtering conditions to components like charts and tables. So there's all kinds of ways to filter data, but today we're going to focus on filtering data at the data layer, essentially at the data worksheet level. And that's useful to do when you want to restrict the data globally. In other words, let's say you have you have a situation where, let's say your database, your data source contains, millions of records. Let's say going back, it's 40 years of data, something like that. And what you want to do when you're setting up the data for users who are creating dashboards or modifying dashboards, you only want them to be able to get to, let's say, the last couple years of that data. Right? So that's obviously, you want to filter the data in a certain way that will restrict it to just the past couple years, because you don't want people pulling back millions and millions of records going back 20 years into the past. All right, so this is just an example of a case where you want to apply some kind of global restriction to the data. And in a case like that, you can apply that restriction at the data worksheet level. That's just an example of an instance where you might want to set your condition at the data worksheet. Therefore, every dashboard that uses that data worksheet, and for that matter, any reports that use that data worksheet, will all have that filter implicitly in place. And that means that the people that are designing those dashboards or designing those reports will not be able to accidentally pull back massive amounts of data that would crash the database or whatever. So that's an example of a case where you might want to apply filter at the data worksheet level rather than at the dashboard level or at the report level. So anyway, let's get into the nuts and bolts of doing this. And I have somewhere in the background here, I have Visual Composer up. I just have to find it. Here it is. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a new worksheet. This is our tool, Visual Composer. I'm sure most of you are quite familiar with it, but just in the event that you're not, you can open it if you have the user portal open. Right, you launch the Visual Composer from the Design tab in the user portal and press Visual Composer over there. That's how I got Visual Composer up and running. And to create a new worksheet, you just press the New Worksheet button, and that opens up a new data worksheet, which is basically our data mashup tool. And there's all kinds of things you can do in here, some of which we've covered probably in other webinars, but today's topic is just to look at filtering. So let's just kind of constrain our activities just to filtering, and I'm not going to look too much into all the other features here. So the most simple case is we'll create a data block. So I'll go to data source, and I'll just find a simple example. We have a sample query here called all sales, and I can just create a data block out of that query. Just drag that query, that all sales query, into the worksheet, and that creates a data block, what we call a data block in the worksheet. You can also just think of it as a table. And there's an option here, if you click over here on the right side, to select live preview, and it just shows me that this is basically the data that I'm seeing in this simple data block. You can see it's just columns and rows. So what I can do is I can filter this data, right? And now, why would I do that? Typically, a data worksheet is not your end result, right? So when you're doing work in a data worksheet like I am now, my goal is not necessarily to share this data worksheet with other people and show them what a nifty data worksheet I made. Usually the goal is at the end of the day to create a dashboard or to create a report. So what we're doing here is we're kind of operating at an intermediate level. Obviously the query that I dragged in here was already created, so somebody created that all sales query, and all these other data sources have already been set up. So obviously we're not operating here at the at the most rudimentary level, somebody already did some work. What we're doing here in the data worksheet is we're typically doing some operations on data to get it into a state where we can then build our dashboards or build our reports off of that data. So one of the things that you might want to do with your data is filter it. So how do you filter data in a data block like this? There's a filtering button here in the title bar of the data block. It says define condition. And if you click on that guy, then it opens up this condition dialog box. And this is where we're going to spend most of our time for this webinar, because this is where you do all of your, with the exception, with an exception that I'll mention later on, which is when you're doing joins, you can also do filtering. And I'll give an example of that later. But most of the filtering that you do at the data worksheet level, you do in this dialog box. And it actually has two different interfaces. It has what I call here the simple conditions interface, and it also has this checkbox over here for advanced conditions that gives you this advanced conditions interface, right, where you can do additional stuff. So we'll take a look at both. First of all, the simple conditions. So what I might want to do for a simple condition is maybe just filter the data block to return just a set of employees or a single employee. I might want to filter it to return, let's say, just a range of dates or just a range of totals, right? So these are all very elementary kinds of filtering, and I can do them all from here just from the simple conditions interface. So I would press the More button. Pardon me. So I just press the More button. It gives me this these options down here. And let's say I just wanted to restrict the data block to return data for a particular employee. I would select from this left menu employee, and then is equal to. I leave these guys as they are. And then what I can do is I can either type over here the name of an employee, such as Sue, right? If I happen to know, what the value is that I want to filter. In many cases, you might not want to rely on your memory for that, either because the terms, the values in that column might be complex, and also because it's case sensitive, so you don't want to make a silly simple mistake, a capitalization mistake, and then you won't get your results. So if you're doing a static value like that, if you're testing against a static value, it's easier to press the Browse Data button here, and it will give you a list of the values that are in that field. So in the employee field, there are 4 possible values, and I can just select from there. So I'll select Eric. That way I'm sure that I'm getting the right spelling and everything like that. And this is a very simple condition. Employee is equal to Eric. Press OK. Right? And then you can see that the data block is filtered so that the only data that I now have in this data block is data where the employee is Eric all the way down. Right? So all the records in that in this result set. Right? So that's probably the most simple example of a filter. And again, the reason that you might choose to do that at the data worksheet level rather than in a dashboard or in a report, which of course you could do also. You can, as I mentioned before, there are many ways to filter at the report level or at the dashboard level. The reason you might want to do it here is if you're building a set of dashboards, for example, and you want those dashboards to all use this same data worksheet, and you want all of those dashboards or all of the components within those dashboards to all be restricted to just display Eric's data, right? So if that's the case, rather than applying that condition in many different places, right, in every dashboard that you want it to appear, or for example in every chart or in every table in every dashboard, rather than having to visit all those separate areas and apply that condition, employee equals to Eric, employee equal to Eric, here and there and everywhere, you can just do it here at the data level, set it over here, and then any dashboard that uses this result set, any dashboard that uses this data block will have that filter in place, right? Okay, so I feel like I've probably explained that enough. So let's go on and take a look just at a few other simple kinds of conditions. So that was one. If you want to edit a condition, you can just, an existing condition, you can just click on it in the list over here. And so we could also filter, for example, a date. If you select a date, like order date is a date type field, then you have some other options here. You've got between options, so you can have if you select that, you can specify a start date and an end date. There's an in-range option, right? So this gives you a long list of sliding ranges, right? These ranges are not fixed. In other words, last year, if you select last year, that is referenced to the current moment in time, right? So if this data worksheet executes now, last year means 2015 because this year is 2016. if this data worksheet executes next year, then last year will refer to 2016, right? So these are all sliding ranges. They're all relevant or related to the current moment in time. Right, so we could do, this quarter, select that, press OK, right, and then the dates that you're going to see and the data that you're going to see in the data block is restricted to just the current quarter, which I guess is the second quarter. Okay, so that's just a couple simple examples. You can also filter numerical fields just to illustrate, to go back here one more time. So we could do something like total is, let's see, like between or maybe greater than some value. I'm not sure what value would make sense. Let's say 50,000. Is there anything? Yeah, there is something over. So if I say in here 50,000, okay, so that's filtering the total column. So now I get back data where the totals are greater than 50,000. And you can create compound conditions also. So those are all simple single clause conditions. So all those conditions that I just did, they just had one condition statement that gets tested. You can create multiple clauses, and if you're operating in the simple conditions interface here, the clauses need to be connected by an AND operator. So let me show you what I mean. Let's say that we wanted to have a condition total is greater than 50,000 and the date is in the range of this year. Right. So what I would do is I would, leaving that condition clause there, I would press the More button, and that would add another clause here that I could then set up to say that order date is in range of this year. Right, and when I press OK, that will add that second clause, and you'll notice that the AND operator gets inserted automatically, and that's the only kind of connection operator that you can have in the simple conditions interface. You cannot change that to an OR operator. Right? So if you want an OR operator in there, then you're going to have to do advanced conditions, which I'll show you in a second. So, so there's the two-part condition, and now what we've got is we've got totals greater than 50,000 where the order date is during this year. So that's an example of a two-part or compound condition. Okay, well, let's take a look at the advanced conditions, right? So I'm going to remove the simple condition here, just say fewer and fewer, right? And so now I'm just back to the original data block that we started with. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to group and aggregate this data block because the chief usefulness of the advanced conditions are when you have a grouped and aggregated data block, because it allows you to do post-aggregate filtering and also ranking conditions, which are typically most useful in a grouped and aggregated data block. So let's do a little bit of grouping here. It's not the topic of today's webinar, but just to show you what I want to show you. So I'll group this data block, and I'll group it by company, and I'll group it by year. So I'll select order date and set the grouping level to year for the order date, and I'll aggregate the totals. So basically what I'm doing here is I'm creating groups of companies and years. So for each company and each year, I want the aggregated total. Okay, so that's just basic grouping and aggregation. I think the previous webinar might have been on that topic. I can't remember exactly, but I definitely feel like we've done a webinar on grouping and aggregation. So if any of that seems mysterious, just check the recorded webinars and see if you can find it. So this data block is now grouped, and as is always the case, the only columns that are retained in the data block are the grouping and aggregate columns. Any other columns are hidden. And so now what I can do is I can show you the advanced conditions. So let's go back to the condition dialog box. All right, and you can still do simple conditions here, but what I want to show you is how you can now do a post-aggregate condition. Right, you can't do a post-aggregate condition as a simple condition. And what I mean by a post-aggregate condition is I want to filter based on these aggregated values. Right, these are not the raw totals anymore. These are aggregated totals. Totals group by group. If you want to filter based on those totals, then you need to switch to advanced conditions. Right, just by clicking that checkbox over there. And then you can see in this interface, you've got three different areas. You've got pre-aggregate conditions, post-aggregate conditions, and ranking conditions. Pre-aggregate conditions are the same as what you have under the simple interface. So if you wanted to specify a simple condition like any of the ones that we did a moment ago, for example, date is in range this year, or company is one of several companies, those are basic pre-aggregate conditions. You can still do those here. You press the edit button and the interface is basically pretty similar to what we had before. You could do employee is one of some set of employees, just similar to what we did earlier, and that would just be another example of a pre-aggregate condition. Same as you could do under the simple conditions interface. But here we want to do a post-aggregate condition. For example, let's say that we want to return only the totals that exceed, let's say, 200,000. Okay, so what I would do in the post-aggregate conditions area, press the edit button, and then I would create a post-aggregate condition. You can see that because I have an aggregate defined, the aggregate is listed here. And so my post-aggregate condition is sum total is greater than, and then I would just enter here 200,000 if I want that to be my condition, and append that, press OK. All right, so now I've got a post-aggregate condition, sum total is greater than 200,000, that refers to these aggregated totals, and if I press OK, right, now this data block, this grouped and aggregated data block will be filtered so that the only groups that are returned are groups that have totals greater than 200,000, and you can see that's the case just by inspection. Right, so that's an example of doing filtering on post-aggregate data. Okay, let's take a look at the one other panel that we had there, which was a ranking condition. Right, and so a ranking condition would be typically that I want, let's say, the top five groups according to the aggregated total. Right, so let's say I've done this kind of grouping and aggregation, and now I'm interested in the top 5 groups according to these aggregated totals. So that's an example of top-end filtering or ranking. So I'll go back to the filtering dialog box, the condition dialog box, going to remove the post-aggregate filter, and take a look at the ranking condition down at the bottom. So to create a ranking condition or a top-end filter, again, press the edit button, press the more button here, and then, like I said, typically you would use this in conjunction with grouping and aggregation, although you don't have to. I mean, you could use it also just for an ungrouped table. You could say, give me the top 10 rows of an ungrouped of a detail table. But in this case, we do have a grouped and aggregated table. So what you would do in that case is you would set it up like this. You would say from the first menu, you would select the aggregate that you're testing, right? So here, all the way down at the bottom, sum total, and I would say top 5, and then select the group that you want to the top so many of which you want to select. So if I select company here, then what I'm saying is I want the top 5 companies according to the aggregated totals. Okay, top 5 companies according to the aggregated totals. If I select the year option here, then what I'm saying is I want the top 5 years according to the aggregated totals. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense because there's only 4 years of data, so I'll just go with company. Top 5 companies according to the aggregated total, press OK, press OK. Right, and so then what I should have here is the top 5 companies, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, top 5 companies according to the aggregated totals. Okay, so that's an example of a ranking condition. Okay, so that basically exhausts the at least the superficial level of these two interfaces, the simple conditions interface and the advanced conditions interface. One thing to pay attention to is that if you're working in both interfaces, both the simple conditions and advanced conditions, if you set up any advanced conditions that are post-aggregate conditions or ranking conditions, those cannot be represented as simple conditions. And the same is true if you set up a pre-aggregate condition here using an OR operator, right? So if you're under advanced conditions and you create a pre-aggregate condition with multiple clauses, and you connect those multiple clauses by using an OR operator, just something like this: employee is Annie, or company is Big Ed's BBQ. Whoops, what happened there? Oh, I forgot to insert, yeah. All right, so this is what I wanted to do. Employee is Annie. Okay, so here's a two-part condition with an OR operator, right, which is perfectly fine. If you're working under advanced conditions, you can easily set up multi-part conditions, composite conditions with OR operators and operators, as many as you want, as many clauses as you want. But if you do that, and then you convert back to simple conditions, the simple condition cannot represent the OR operator. So, so it's going to get lost. Likewise, if you set post-aggregate conditions or ranking conditions and then you convert back to simple conditions, those post-aggregate and ranking conditions will also be lost. So probably the smart thing to do is if you're doing advanced conditions, if you find yourself working in this interface, then just stay in this interface. Don't go back to the simple conditions because you're going to lose stuff. Okay. So we've seen basically how to use this interface, and we've seen how to use this interface, but there's additional complexity here, and we're going to dig down a little bit deeper now. So, so I'm going to cancel out of here. Actually, I'll just press OK, so that gets rid of any conditions. I'm going to remove the grouping, clear out the grouping, okay, and that returns us back to our original data block, original detail data block. Okay, so what I want to look at now are some of the options that are available from the mystery pop-up menu, which is this one over here. So if I'm adding a condition, you'll notice that all the way here, again, I'm under simple conditions, but you'd find it under advanced conditions also. All the way on the right, there's this mystery pop-up button, little triangle button, and it gives you a whole bunch of options here: value, variable, expression, field, and subquery. So what I'd like to do is look at what these different things are, and how you use them. So that's the plan for the remainder of the webinar. So the next item in the list here, value, we've already seen. Basically, value is when you want to set a fixed or static value, right? So, you know, for a date, it might be a fixed date that you pick from a calendar. For a for a string field, right? It might be a fixed value for that string field. For a numerical field, like total, it might be some fixed value that you type in. But in all cases, when you select that value option, it's basically you're just going to enter a fixed value. It's just a static condition, right? That's the most simple case. What about this variable condition? Well, to see how this would work, let's actually create a variable. And my idea here is that I'd like to be able to filter this data block, but I don't want to set up the condition in a static form. In other words, I don't want to say, for example, employee is always equal to Annie or employee is always equal to Eric. Rather, I'd like the user to be able to make that choice, right? I'd like the user to be able to choose at some later time what data they want to see in that data block. And so to do that, I need to make this condition dynamic, right? So the way that I'll do this, there's a couple ways to go about this, actually probably more than a couple, but I'll do this kind of the rigorous way, which is to define a variable in the data worksheet, first of all. So I'll go up to the New Object button in the title bar and select Variable. That opens up this Variable Properties dialog box, and I'll give it a name. I'll just call it Employee. And you can create a label. I don't really care to do that. You can specify what type it is. In this case, employee is going to be type string because it's going to allow the user to input the name of an employee, which obviously is a string. If you want to set a default value, you can do that by unchecking none and typing in, if you want Sue to be the default value, you could do that, but I'll just leave that set to none. And then you can choose how you want to populate this list, right? And the main options here are embedded or query. In fact, you don't really need to set anything here because ultimately what we're going to do is I'll show you that the user of the dashboard can actually pass the value into this variable, so we don't need to worry about too much about populating it here. But if you want to, we could just do an embedded list, right? And we would just type in the names of the salespeople. So I'll just do that. Take a moment. And then I'll just show you the other query option also. Sue, Robert, Eric, and somebody else, Annie. Okay, an embedded list is just a manually entered list. Okay, so those are going to be the options, and then there's a display style here. This is just how it's going to be when the user is prompted, how they get prompted. Generally, you're probably not going to rely on the data worksheet to prompt users for anything, so at the end of the day, it's probably not going to matter what display style you choose. Anyway, those are the settings to set up a variable, and that creates this new component here, is a variable component. Just want to show you what it looks like. Okay, and what I want to do is now I want to use this variable component in a condition, right? And that will make the condition dynamic. So now that I've created this variable object, what I'll do is go to the condition dialog box for the data blocks that I want to filter and set up the condition just the way that I ordinarily would. If I want to filter on employee, I would say employee is equal to, but then from the mystery pop-up button all the way on the right side, select that, choose variable, and it gives me a menu, and in that menu I can select the variable that I could create, that I created a moment ago, right? So that was the, you'll recall, there's a variable called employee, right? So there it is listed as a variable. If I had created other variable objects in the data worksheet, they would all be listed here, and I could select which one I want. So this is how I'm going to set up the condition employee, right? Referring to that first column, the employee column. The value in that column should be equal to a value that's supplied by a variable called employee, right? And that value will be supplied by the user at a later time. All right, so that's an example of a dynamic condition. Press OK. All right, and immediately the data worksheet will prompt me for the value of that variable, right? So where's this list coming from? This is the embedded list that I set up for that variable. So that's why it's giving me those options, because those are the options that when I set up that variable, those are the options that I typed in the embedded list, right? And it's showing them to me as radio buttons because I selected that I wanted the radio button interface, right? So I could select, for example, Eric, right? And then what should happen is when I press OK, the value that I select should be passed into that condition, and the condition should then effectively read employee is equal to Eric, and I should see the table filtered so that I have only Eric's data. So let me try it. Press OK, right? And that works. Right, so that's an example of a dynamic condition where you use a variable, like this to set the right-hand side of the condition. Now, the truth is that you don't really need to create a variable object. In fact, you can, if you want to do this, kind of quick and dirty kind of thing, and you're in a rush, we can get rid of that. Let me just switch this back for a moment. Switch this back to value. Whoops, I guess I didn't put anything there. I'll just, let me just set it to Annie for a moment. And I'm going to get rid of this variable object. Okay, so no more variable object. I can still create a variable condition, right? I don't need the formal variable object, and the way that I would do that is I would go back here, and I would, same way that I did before, I would select a variable over here. You can see that it's still prompting me for, even though I deleted that variable, that might be a glitch. Probably it just has that cached somewhere. But there is no variable in the data worksheet anymore called employee because I deleted that. So, but what I can do is I can just type the name of a random variables, arbitrary variable. So let's, I'll just type EMP. Oh, it decided to complete that to employee. There, right? So, so I just typed EMP as the name of a variable, and so, and that should be fine. It will then know that this is a parameterized condition, right? And it will try to get a value for that variable EMP. So if I press OK, it's going to prompt me, right, to provide a value for that variable EMP. Obviously, now it's not giving me a choice of the different employees because there is no formal variable object, so it doesn't have that list anymore to prompt me, but it's just prompting me with a string, to enter a string value, and I can enter Sue, for example. I know that's the name of one of the employees, press OK, and that still works, right? It's still a, a valid parameterized condition that uses a variable. It's just not using the formal variable object. Okay. Well, let me return to the situation of having that formal variable object, because that probably is the nicer way to do it. Let me see if I can just backtrack a few times and get back to there. Okay, there it is. Maybe one more time. Okay, let's see if that's still functional. Incidentally, if you want to prompt for parameters at a later time, or at any time, I should say, there's an Enter Parameters button at the top. You press the Enter Parameters button, and again, you see the prompt, and you could select select somebody. Okay, so this is all working again, back the way we originally had it. What I wanted to show you is that in many cases, like I said, the data worksheet is not the end result that you're shooting for. Typically you would want you want to create a dashboard or you want to create a report, and so generally you're not going to be presenting the data worksheet to your end users, and they would not be entering parameters this way. But what you can do is you can create in your dashboard, you can create an input component that will pass a value into this variable in the data worksheet. So let me just show you how you would do that. So I'm going to save this data worksheet as let's call it just condition example. Okay, so I'm saving this data worksheet. Okay, and then I'm going to create a new view sheet. A view sheet is a dashboard based on that data worksheet that we just made. So it is, what did I just call it? Condition example. Okay. And the first thing you'll notice is that this new view sheet that I base on that worksheet, it's prompting me for that variable. So this is the prompt that's coming from the data worksheet. Probably I don't want that prompt because it's, it doesn't look very good, and it's kind of going to be jarring for a user of a dashboard to see this prompt popping up that doesn't really explain what it is, and so on. So so we'll see how to deal with that in a moment. But I'm just going to press OK there. And then let's say that I have, I'm creating this dashboard based on the worksheet. So I'm just going to whip up very quick because my goal here is not to show you dashboards, but just to show you some filtering techniques. So let's say we had something like this. Okay, so we have a chart, and what I want is I want the user of this dashboard to be able to pass a value into the condition, into this variable in the data worksheet. Now, obviously, if that's all that you wanted to do, there's really no reason to use the variable or anything, because if it's just a simple situation where you want to filter the user, you would just add you would grab, just like this. If you're doing the dashboard design, you would just add a selection list, and that would let the user filter filter which employee they want to see in the dashboard. So just keep that in mind if you're thinking this is all overly complex. Yes, what I'm showing you is overly complex, but I'm just trying to show you how you can get the dashboard to pass a value into the variable in the underlying worksheet if you're setting up your worksheet that way. So what you would do if you wanted to do it is you would add a radio button or other input control, other form control to your dashboard, and then you would set this up. So go to properties, and I can, I could set up the same embedded list over here. I said I would show you the query option. I'll show you that in a moment back in the data worksheet. But here, let me just set this up again really quick. I'll just add a couple options, I guess, just to save typing time. So let's say Sue and Robert. Okay, just a couple of options to choose from. So I'm setting up this radio button. For the title, I could say something like choose employee. And then what I would want to do here is I would want to go to the data tab, right? If I want the value that the user enters in this radio button to be passed into the underlying worksheet, you go to the data tab, you expand the target menu, and in there you expand variables, because I want to pass the value that the user enters in the radio button into a variable in the underlying data worksheet, and then you select the variable that you want. And you can see that this worksheet, the underlying worksheet, has a variable called employee, right? That's the variable that we put in that worksheet, so I would select that. And by doing that, and then pressing OK, right, so now I've got this radio button, and when I, as a user, make a choice from this radio button, either Sue or Robert, it's going to pass that selection into this variable, and of course the value of this variable is then used to filter the data block, and then, to come full circle, the data block is what is populating this chart, right? So if I choose Sue, right, then I see Sue's data in the chart because, again, the choice that I make here is being passed into the data worksheet, filtering the data block in the data worksheet. If I select Robert, I see Robert's data, right? So that's how you would hook up a dashboard to pass a value into a variable in the underlying data worksheet, which would then filter the data block in a dynamic fashion. Again, I don't want you to take away from this that this is the method by which to filter a chart. No, this is not the method by which you would typically filter a chart. Typically, you would let me undo. Yeah. So typically the way you would filter a chart is, like I said before, is you would add a selection list, and you would use the selection list to filter the chart. That's, it's more efficient, it's more flexible. But if you are doing a data worksheet that has a dynamic condition like this, where you're using a variable, you can allow the user of a dashboard to pass values into that variable. Okay, let me move on from there so that we don't completely run out of time. Let me show you next, to go back to the data worksheet. Yeah, I was going to show you the query option. Just when you're setting up a variable, there is also a query option for populating it, right? So the query option here in a data worksheet, basically this will allow you to populate the options in the variable from another data block, right? So right now, if I select query and do select, the only data block that I have is the original data block that I put there called all sales 1. I don't want to use that because if I use that to populate the radio button, it's going to create a loop. And in fact, it will probably give me a warning. It'll say dependency cycle or something like that. So if I press OK, actually, does it let me do that? No, it says dependency cycle found. And the reason for that is that basically what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to have the options provided by this variable be drawn from the table, but of course the option that the user selects in the variable changes the values in the table, which would then change the values in the variable, so you get that kind of dependency feedback, and everything breaks. So then what usefulness does this option have, this query option here? Well, what you would then do if you wanted to use that, for example, let's say that the list of employees was, rather than 4 employees, let's say it was 2,700 employees, right? You don't want to type all of those in an embedded table. So what you would do then is you would find some other query that has that list. Let's say maybe sales by employee. All right, so here's this might be a parameterized, this might not be the best choice, but anyway, here's a little query that somebody made, and this returns the employee names. What I can do is I can populate the variable from this data block, right? Whereas the variable is being used to filter this data block, so there is no dependency cycle then. So what I would do then is go into the properties here, and if I want to use that query option, I would select sales by employee 1, first name as the label, and the value, right? That's this column here, right? It's the salesperson first name. Press OK, press OK, right? So that should work okay. And now if I press Enter Parameters, right? So the labels and the values that are being prompted here are being drawn from this sales by employee data block, right? And when I make a selection, for example, Annie, right, it's being used to filter this data block. So there's no dependency cycle. So that's how you would use that query option. And obviously, in this case, it's really not necessary because you could type a list of 4 names. But again, if the list of options is much longer, or if the list is constantly changing, right? If you have, let's say, a situation where your employees, let's say it's it's a McDonald's or something, and every week you've got different employees starting and leaving, then you don't want to create an embedded list, because that would be, a real pain to keep updating. What you would want to do is, you'd want to populate that variable from, some database that has that continuously changing information. Okay, enough about variables. Let's move on to, before I run out of time, let's move on to the next option, which was expression. So I'm going to delete these guys. Oh, well, first I need to unhook the condition, otherwise it will give me an error. So let me just set this back temporarily to value, and just put something in there. Then I'll get rid of these guys. Okay, so the next thing that I want to look at is the expression option. Right, and so if we go back to the condition here, right, you can see that from the mystery pop-up button all the way on the right, there's an expression option here. And basically what this does is it lets you write either a JavaScript or a SQL expression that will supply the right-hand side of the condition. So I'll just create a simple example of this where basically I want the, again, I want to create a dynamic condition, and the value, basically what I want to prompt the user with is to select either last year or this year, right? And then I want to filter the data block based on that, right? Last year or this year. So what I could do is I could create a variable, right? Again, like we did before, a variable, I'll call it period. That's the name of the variable. It's going to be type string. I'll create an embedded list. Last year. Notice that I'm making the labels and values different. The label is what gets displayed, the value is what gets submitted. So last year, this year, whoops, this year. Okay, last year and this year, so those are the two things that the user can select. I don't really care about the prompting, so I'll just leave it as combo box. Okay, so there's a variable, and then I'm going to use the variable in an expression. Now, you might ask, well, if I have a variable like this, why can't I just use the variable option for the condition? Right, so if I go in here, right, so what might I want to do? Well, I might want to select a variable over here and maybe do something like order date is in range. But you'll notice that if I select the in range operator, and that gives me a choice of this year or last year, right? But there's no option to select a variable for that, right? So I can either create a static condition this year, or I can create a static condition last year, right? But I can't hook that up to this variable. So that's just a limitation in this version of the software. Actually, in the next version, I expect that to be fixed. Well, not fixed, improved, because there should be, for the in-range operator, there should be then that mystery button there, and you should be able to select variable, in which case then you could just use the variable here. But in this case, we can't. So what we could do, and again, the purpose of this is not to highlight, what's changing version to version. I'm just trying to show you the different techniques. So even though you wouldn't need to do this particular thing in the next version, you still need to know how to use an expression. So, so what you could do is you could do, instead of in range, you could do between, right? So you could say order date is between a start date and an end date, but obviously the what's being supplied here is not a start date and an end date. What's being supplied here is either the string this year or last year. So this is a situation where you can use an expression. Basically, you can use your expression to find out what the user specified for the period, either this year or last year, and convert that into a start date and end date that the condition can use. Right? So it's just an example of using an expression to get the right to get the right-hand side of this condition in the form that you need it. So what you would do is you would press the mystery pop-up button, select expression over there, select expression over here. There's a button that lets you switch between SQL and JavaScript, so we're going to do JavaScript. Right, so click on that, select JavaScript, and then press the FX button. So the first expression that we're going to write is to set the start date. Right, this is the start date. Right, so press FX, and then what I want to write is if. Right, so this is going to be a little expression that returns a start date. Right, and so the condition over here needs to test what the user submits from the period parameter. So the way that I'm going to access that is with the keyword parameter. I always spelled that wrong. Parameter dot period. Right? Period is the name of the variable. Parameter dot period is how you reference that value. So if that's equal to last year, right? Last year is one of the possible things the user could submit as the value of that variable. So if it's last year, gets submitted from that variable, then the start date is going to be, I'm going to return a new date, And the year, so last year would be, the start date would be, it would be 2015. And it would be January is index 0 and the 1st of January of 2015. Whoops. Then I'll say else. So in other words, else meaning if what gets submitted as the value of the period variable is this year, well then the start date of this year would be new date 2016, comma 0, comma 1. Okay, so basically, hopefully this is not too confusing, but basically what I'm doing in the script, and again, the script is setting the right-hand side of this condition. It's setting this field here as a date, right? So the date that it's going to set here needs to be the start date of the data that I want to include in the data block. And so the way that I'm computing that start date is by seeing what the user submitted as the variable, right? So if they submitted last year, the string last year, right, then the start date is January 1st, 2015. Otherwise, the start date is January 1st, 2016. I'm going to copy this script because I can use almost identically this script for the end date. Right? So I'm going to press for the end date, press the FX button here, copy in that script, and I just need to change the dates here because if the user selected last year as the value of the variable, then the end date is going to be 2015 December 31st. These are the end dates now. Whereas if the user selected this year, meaning they didn't select last year, then the end date is going to be December 31st of 2016. December is index 11 because it's indexed from 0. January is index 0. So basically what I've done here is I've written two little expressions, and each expression looks at what gets submitted, what the value of the period variable is, and based on that value, either this year or last year, it sets the start date and the end date appropriately. So let's try it out. Press OK. Right, you can see that I'm being prompted to enter the value of this period parameter. So if I select enter last year, right, and take a look at these dates, right, so I see 2015 all the way down. Right. Let's prompt again. So I'll press the enter parameters button, and this time I'll select this year. Right. So what does it mean if I select this year? It means that when I select this year, it means that the value of this period variable is going to be assigned this year. You know, lowercase t, no spaces. The value of the period variable will adopt the value this year, and then my expression in the condition will take that value and will translate it into the start date and end date, which are January and December of 2016. Right? So if I select this year, then I get 2016. So again, that's an example of using an expression in a condition. You can see that the syntax it creates is a little bit involved here, but basically it's pretty simple. It's basically just for the start date, I have this simple expression, and for the end date, I have that simple expression. And again, that's just to show you an example of using the expression option. Okay, if there's any questions about that, that's probably about as involved as we'll get here. And I only have 10 more minutes, so let's see what else I can do here. There are a couple other options here. There's well, not there, but so let me get rid of this expression here. Let's get rid of that. So now I have the data block back to where it was before originally. The other options for condition are field and subquery and session data. Well, I'll do my best to, I might skip the subquery option for reasons of time, but let me quickly just show you what field is. Field is where you want to make a condition that's based on two fields in the same data block. So what would be an example of that? Well, let's say that we had created a situation where we had a data block with both this year's sales and last year's sales. Right, so let's say here I've got all sales. This is my original data block. Let's say that I made one version of this that had maybe, let's see, should I group it first? Yeah, let me group this first. So I'm going to group this. I'll call this one, I'll call it this year. And I'm going to put a little bit of grouping here. I'll group it by employee and month of year. So I'll group the date field by month of year. That means that I just get 12 groups, one for each month of the year. If I can find it, month of year, and then we'll aggregate the totals. Okay, so I just did some grouping here. So basically what I have is, and I should filter this also. Right, so I'm going to put a filter on it that restricts it to just this year. So we'll do, oh no, that doesn't make sense. Wait a minute. Oh, that doesn't, no, that's fine, yeah. Order date is in range of this year. Okay, so basically what I have here is I just created a grouped and aggregated data block that has basically just data from this year, and it's grouped by employee and month of year. Okay. And then I want to make another version of this that has basically the same thing for last year. So I'm going to make a copy of this guy, and I'll call it last year. And I'll just change the condition to be last year, in range last year. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to join these together, basically so that I have last year's totals together with this year's totals. So let me rename these columns. So this is this year total, TY total, and over here is last year total, LY total. Okay, so I'm just going to join these together, and again, the purpose here is not to teach you about joins, which we may have done in another webinar, I can't recall, but I'm just going to do a quickie join here. I'll join these on employee, and I'll join them on month of year. Okay, and then let me take a look at what we've got here. Okay, so we've got duplicate columns. I don't need 2 employee columns, so I can hide one of those, and I don't need 2 month of year columns. Okay, so basically what I have here, and this is the point, so if any of that was confusing, this is, don't worry about it. This is the data block that I have here, and it basically has employee, month of year. You can see that the months of year are numbered from 1 to 12. And for that particular month, for example, for January, and for salesperson Annie, it has this year's total and last year's total. So what you can do with that field operator from the condition is, if you want to put a condition here, and let's say that you want only the rows in the table where this year's total is greater than last year's total, right? So you can do that type of condition with the field operator, right? So let's see how to do it. So I'm going to put the condition on this result, right? So add a new condition. It can be a simple condition. And I would want to do something like this. If I want all the rows where, what did I say, this year's total is greater than last year's total, so TY total is greater than, and then select field, and then select LY total. Right? So this year total is greater than last year total. You're setting a condition based on 2 fields within the same data block. Right? So that's what the field operator allows you to do. Right, and again, whether that makes sense or not really depends on what the data is in your data block, right? So if you have data like this, that it's reasonable to compare in one way or another, right? So then you can use that kind of operator, press OK, right? And that should restrict the rows in this table to only rows where this year's total is greater than last year's total. Okay, so that's the field operator. If there's any questions about any of these operators, any of these operations, feel free to ask. Let me skip ahead then, having shown you that. Let me just skip ahead to the last of them, and then I'll double back and do the subquery operator. So, so this was this one. Before I show you the session, before I show you the last of those options, let me just point out that, as I mentioned I was going to do before, that some of these kinds of filtering you can do as part of a join as well, right? So when you're doing a join, you are doing filtering. A join has filtering implicit as as part of the operation of the join. For example, when we join these two tables, we're filtering out all the rows where the employee doesn't match and where the month of year doesn't match. And so if I were to delete this result, what I could have done is when I set up the join between these two guys, I could have also included, as the part of the join condition, I could have included that TY total is greater than LY total. Well, so let me just show you how you would do that without creating an explicit condition, right? So, so the way that I had joined these originally was just by clicking and dragging like this, right? That's, oops, not like that. Like, whoops, wait a minute. This is the way that I originally did the join. There, and whoops, month of year, month of year. Okay, so it's a double join. That's the way I had originally set it up. And if I go in and edit that join by right-clicking and selecting join properties, right here, it shows me the join conditions. What I could have done is I could have added an additional join condition that says TY total is greater than LY total. Right. So in doing this, basically, I'm incorporating that inequality condition as part of the join operation. So when these two tables get joined together, in addition to being synchronized on employee, right? So in other words, it makes sure that all the rows in the result have this year employee matching last year employee, and all the rows in the result have this year month of year matching last year month of year, and also in the result, it will make sure that all of the rows in the result have this year total greater than last year total. Right, so that's, you can do that. You can include a condition like that as part of a join if you're doing a join, right? And this should, there you can see the inequality join, the third inequality join, and the result should be the same as the way that we had done it before by doing, obviously I'd hide some of these columns, but what we did the first way is we did the join, the inner join first, and then we applied the inequality condition to the result. But what we have here is we just did the three conditions all at once, the two join conditions, the two equijoin conditions, and the inequality condition all as part of the join. So that's certainly also a viable way to do this. The last thing, the last condition that I wanted to show you is that, let me take a look. I'll just make a copy of this one and remove this join. Viewer, and just show you that there's also an option here to use session data. Session data means basically user, role, or group information about the currently logged in user. Right, so what you might want to do here is, let's say you've got a data worksheet with a data block like this, and let's say you've got some dashboards that are using this data block, and what you want to happen is that when a user logs in to use one of those dashboards, you only want them to see their own data, right? So let's say that Annie is a user, and Annie logs in to use a dashboard, and that dashboard is pulling data from this, or rather, from this data block, right? What you want is that that the only data that they're going to see in there is data where the employee field has the value of Annie, right? Because that's the currently logged in user. So you know, so rather than do it like this, rather than set this as a value and set it statically to Annie, and that, because that would only work for Annie then, right? Everybody who logs in would see only Annie's data. But if you want the person logging in, assuming that it's one of these four salespeople, if you want them to see their own data, then what you would do is you would use session data and select user, right? And then what happens is that the right-hand side of this condition gets substituted with the username of the current user, right? So if Annie logs in, then this gets replaced by Annie, right? So then the condition is employee is equal to Annie. If Eric logs in, then the right-hand side of this condition is Eric, and then the condition says employee is equal to Eric. So that's a way to make a condition dynamic based on information about the current user session, right? It could also be based, obviously, on roles, the user's roles, or the user's groups. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the hour. For those of you who want to stay around a couple more minutes, I'll just say some things about the subquery option, because I had intended to do that, and since this is being recorded, I hope you know, you can always come back and listen to the recording. So anyone who has to split at this point, you know, have a nice weekend, and thanks for listening, and hopefully see you back next month. Anyone who wants to hear a little bit about the subquery option, stick around a few minutes and I'll just go on to that. So what about that subquery option? That was the last of the things that we saw there that I didn't talk about. Here it is, subquery. So basically, what subquery lets you do is it lets you complete the right-hand side of the condition with data from another data block, right? So let's say you have a situation where you want to apply a filter to a data block, but the information that you need to complete the condition is not in that data block. It's not in that same data block. It's in some other data block, right? In some other table, some other data worksheet table, right? So that's where the subquery comes in handy. So let's do a simple example and then a little bit more complex example. So the simple example is, let me see what the simple example is. Let's do a situation like this. Let me remove. Let me just get the all sales query back. I'm going to leave this year and last year up here at the top. I might use those again. And here we are back to this is the original data block that we were working with. And let's just see what we have. It has companies. Right. So let's say that I want to filter this data block to give me only the companies in New York, in the state of New York. Right. So so you can see the problem right away, which is that you know, if I had in this data block, if I had a column that gave me the state, right? So if there was a state column here, then I would just do a very simple condition. I would just say state is equal to New York, and bang, I'd be done, right? I'd have, you know, the companies that are in the state of New York. Problem is that there is no state column, right? So I can't create that condition. So what I can do is, if I have that information in some other data block, I can leverage that other data block. So for example, let's say that I have a data block, let's see if I can find something. How about, which one would have, maybe customers. Here's a query called customers. All right, so this query looks like this, right? And you can see that this one does have a state column, and it also has the company names. Right, so that strikes me as something that might help me here, right? Because now this will help me learn which companies are in the state of New York, for example, or in any other state. So I can use this other data block as the target of a subquery, basically using this to supply the value for a condition for this data block over here. So let's try it. So I'll press the, I'm setting the condition, of course, is on this data block here. So press the condition button, add a condition, company, and I'll say company is, let's see, should we do equal to or one of? Let's first try equal to. Company is equal to, and then I want to select the subquery option, right, and that gives me a button here I can press subquery. And you know, what I probably should do is I should have filtered this other data block. So let me back out of here for a second. Right, what I should do is I should filter this data block to give me only the companies in New York. Right, so let me do that. Filter this guy. All right, so here I'm going to filter company name, sorry, not company name, state is equal to New York. All right, so now I've got New York companies in this data block, right? And that's the information that I want. So now back up here, I can set my condition, and I can just do like this, company, and here I would just do one of, is one of, and basically what I want here is I just want the list of companies that I've already created in this other data block, right? It's these four companies are the companies in New York. I want to get that list of companies, right? So I would press the subquery option here, press the subquery button, right? And then I have to choose which data block am I going to pull this information from. Obviously, it's the customers one data block, and I want to pull the data from the company name field. In this case, I don't need to worry about these bottom options here. I'm going to ignore them because all I want is that list of companies that are in New York. So I'm just telling it what data block to pull the data from. This is the customers one data block, and I'm saying that I want the values in the company name field, right? The company name field in this customers one data block. Press OK, And that's a very simple example of using a subquery. Press OK. Right? And what I should have now, if I look at this data block that I just added the condition to, is the only companies that I should see in this data block are the companies that are in this data block here, right? Which happen to be the companies in New York, right? So you know, if you scroll down, you should see just that list of companies: Fiska, Old World, and so on. Okay, so that's a very simple example of using a subquery just to return a list. I'm just returning the list of companies from this data block. Let's take a look, just to wrap it up, at a little bit more involved example, but not terrible, hopefully. So I'm going to get rid of this. Oh, let me get rid of this then. Okay, and for this example, I'm going to go back over here. I have, again, this year and last year. Let's see if I can use this directly. I think what I actually want here is category, quantity, and total this year and last year. So let me undo. Let me just see if I have the fields that I want here. I want category, quantity, and total. Do I have that? I don't have it here. Employee category. Okay, so let me get rid of these, and I'll just create from the data model. I'll create a different data block. So I want category, quantity, and total. Let's see, category. Bear with me a minute. Category, and then quantity and total. I just want to make this simple because the logic is a little bit hard to understand, so I want to make it a simple data block here. So here's okay, and I'm going to group on category, and I'll just aggregate the quantity and total. Hopefully this will work. Okay, and I'm going to call this this year, and I'm going to filter it to be yeah. Okay, I'll call this this year, and I'll make a copy of this for last year. Oh, I should probably, did I apply the filter? I don't think so. So this one is going to be filtered to give me just this year. And this one I'll call last year, and filter it to give me just last year's data. Okay, so what do I want to do? So now I've got, basically I've got quantities and totals for this year, quantities and totals for last year. So let's say the situation is this. Let's say that I wanted, let's say in this data block, I wanted the categories where the total for this year is higher than the total for last year, right? So I want to filter this, and there's probably a bunch of different ways to do this, but I want to filter this so that the only categories that I see here are categories where the total is higher than the corresponding category for last year. Right? Probably what I want to do is I'd want to oh, whatever. I just want to finish up this example so I can let you go. Okay, so hopefully you get the idea. I want to see categories where the total for this year is greater than the total for last year. So what I could do is I can use a subquery. Right. So here's how I would write the condition. Actually, interesting. Yeah, obviously this already has a condition on it. Is that going to cause a problem? Let me just think about this for a second. Let me think if I need to make a mirror of this. Let me just see what happens. Maybe it would be better if I made a mirror. Okay, well let's try it with the mirror here. So what I want again is here I want the categories where this total is greater than that total. So let me actually change the name of that. Last year total. Okay, and this one I'll call this year total. Okay, so so how do I do it? So I'm going to apply a condition over here. I'm operating on the mirror. Apply a condition, and the condition is going to be that that I want the total. I want the this year total to be greater than, right, some other total, but the other total is in this other data block. So I have to use a subquery, right? And the subquery is going to refer to last year, the last year data block, right? So I want to get a value out of the last year data block, and I want the value that I want to get is the last year total, right? But I want to make sure that I match it up category by category. So I'm going to select that I want to match the subquery product category field with the current data block product category field. Right, so basically what I'm saying is, if I can move this out of the way, that in the data block that I'm filtering, I want to see only the rows where this year's total is greater than the last year's total from the last year data block, where the category is matched to the category in the table that I'm filtering. Right, so basically category by category, I want only the rows where this year's total is greater than last year's total. Hopefully that makes some kind of sense. Press OK. Okay. And so the result here should be, you can see that it's a little bit shorter than that one. The result here is just the categories where this year's total is greater than last year's total. So that's a little bit more complex example of using a subquery where you're essentially accessing the values in a row-dependent manner. In other words, I'm comparing the two totals based on matching up the category value here with the category value there, and if this year's total for that category is greater than last year's total for the same category, then I filter out those rows. Okay, I'm going to stop talking. Sorry I went so long. So that's basically the lay of the land for filtering in a data worksheet. And hopefully that you got something new out of that. So I'm going to stop talking and see if anybody has any questions about anything that I said. I'll just pause for a moment. Okay, either that was incredibly well presented and very clear, or everybody has already left the webinar, not sure which, but in any case, if you're still typing a question, I will stay on the line for another minute, but for those of you who want to get off and get about your day, thank you for joining, and is that a question or a sign-off? Okay, good. You're very welcome, Jim. Thank you for saying so. So thanks a lot for joining, everyone, and have a nice weekend, and see you back next month, hopefully. Thanks.